Okay, we're going to start. This is the meeting of August 29th of the Zoning Subcommittee. This meeting is being recorded for later rebroadcast on Amherst Media, and but otherwise we're not live. Note that this meeting is starting at 4 o'clock. We're going to try and end at 5:30-ish, and again, we've elected to put public comment primarily at the planning board meetings so that the full planning board can hear comments. If there's time, we're going to try and get through as many articles today as we can, focusing on this as a working meeting. If we have time to take public comment, if there's something relevant, we'll do it, but we don't want to get into prolonged discussions. Are there any announcements? I'll report on the request of the committee last time for me to contact the town manager about getting money for paying someone to take minutes. I did send an email explaining the situation. I have not heard back from him yet, but I expect to at some point in the future. So as of now, we have no solution to our continuing problem. Hopefully Bruce will continue to
I will.
take the minutes. Thank you very much. Minutes from previous meetings that are not yet approved. I saw we had
It's on August 1st.
August 1st. Are there any comments on the minutes? Motion?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes of August 1st? That's 4-0. Okay, so we're going to jump right into articles now. I'll note that the planning board has already scheduled 2 public hearings for DEP surface water supply and residential registration requirement. The zoning subcommittee traditionally has offered a recommendation on those. We have not formally taken a vote yet. That public hearing will be next Wednesday, September 5th, so we don't need to do something today, but by next week we probably should. So the first one, DEP surface water supply protection. Is there any discussion on that, or does anyone want to make a motion? Go ahead.
I would note that we think we want to change the title to that, and we've added some language to clarify that this applies to all public water supplies, not just surface water supplies, and we don't necessarily need to make reference to the Department of Environmental Protection in that. So we want to change the title of this, although it will go forward on the public hearing as its current title, to Public Water Supply Protection, just so that that's broadly clear. And then within the amendment proposed in 3.19, we would add the zones which apply to public water supply wells and surface public water supplies into the language, so that that's clear that such zones exist. We're not going to go into great detail, and people are referred to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts regulations that apply there, and ostensibly would go and look and find out, which is really the purpose of this amendment, is to note that this is the case. I would just as a matter of background, I don't know if we've discussed this before, but the Watershed Protection District, which is also being amended here with a similar reference, is seriously out of date, and we need to put it on the list, the long list of amendments, map amendments and other kinds of amendments that need to be made. The purpose of this is not to fix anything in the zoning bylaw. The purpose of this is to support other changes that are occurring and to bring the town into compliance so that our permitting with the state for our public water supplies can proceed unimpeded. This is a short-term fix. If we're going to continue to have a watershed protection district, we need to amend it in some fairly substantial ways, including the map.
Okay, so the map, but also language.
Language, and there are vestigial references in other parts of the bylaw to places where the watershed protection district used to be but is no longer. Um, it's one of many such things throughout the bylaw that just have accumulated like dust bunnies under the refrigerator, and we need to move the refrigerator and clean the whole area.
We received a memo, I guess that it's intended for the public hearing next week, but it's relevant now, from the Coles Company asking for a sunset on the entire section, I take it. Is that...
Well, that would be part of a discussion about the future of the watershed protection overlay district. It is an overlay district. My own initial position on that would be to say that because the Commonwealth of Massachusetts regulations pertaining to public water supplies and public wells have discrete geographic areas, they have zones, that it's perfectly appropriate for the community to have some matching regulation in its zoning that corresponds to that, and whether it's in terms of zoning districts or whether it's just referring to the state mapping which exists. That's not the principal source of protection. The principal source of protection is Board of Health regulations, because it is a public health issue. But I think going forward we would need to have that conversation, and it might well make sense to do away with the watershed protection district and instead institute something else. I have a feeling that the interests of W.D. Coles are to have no further visible regulation there in the zoning, but that wouldn't take away from the regulation that exists in state law at all, which is more stringent, actually.
Go ahead.
Question for Mr. Tucker, and I was reminded to speak into the microphone at all times, so I'm going to try to be very careful about that. The issue that D.W. Coles brings up, does that in any way, a response to that, would that in any way change the language here that we're looking at for this particular amendment?
I don't believe so. The request received was, well, now that you're doing this, maybe you don't need the watershed protection district, and can you just do away with it?
But if we discuss it at a public hearing, we're not locking ourselves in. That issue stands separate from the language we're looking at. So my comment is, rather than have to talk about this again on the 5th at our meeting, if we feel content, it's somewhat of a housekeeping item. It's been explained to us many times in good and complete detail. Maybe we could just knock it off and make our recommendation if people felt ready.
I have one question. This is very minor, but Part A says to amend Section 3.1 by adding a new Section 3.19. I'm not sure that's the right number, but
Oh, well, we can check. It should be 3.14.
Ooh, good catch.
okay. So is there a motion?
I move that we recommend to the planning board the approval of the surface water supply protection amendment, adding 3.19. I'm not exactly sure how to word this, adding.
Okay, I think the article in front of us is fine.
Okay, the article, okay.
Is there a second? Any further discussion? All in favor of recommending to the planning board that this article be adopted? That's 4-0. So we're not going to discuss this next week unless something dramatic happens.
Hallelujah.
Okay, we're going to move on to residential use amendments. We're going to start with duplexes or two dwelling units because we've talked about this tangentially for the last several weeks, but not directly about duplexes. And so I'd like to have a full discussion of this. I'd also like to make sure that we cover lodging and boarding house, because seems to me a simple definition. And then as many of the other ones as possible. And at the end, try and determine what is a good schedule for public hearings for the planning board over the next 2 months. Okay, so does anyone want to start the discussion?
If I could, I'd
Sure.
like to just sort of quickly summarize the pieces here, and then that might be a sort of starting point for discussion. This does basically three things. It takes the existing single two-family detached dwelling use category and divides it into two classes, which is a thing that is done throughout the use chart. We have a number of those. And in so doing, it differentiates between the classes on the basis of whether or not there is an owner-occupant and whether or not the dwelling unit is being occupied by a household as defined as being up to four unrelated persons. The second thing it does is to address actually in the first bold and italicized paragraph on the first page, design issues as a way of defining what a duplex is and isn't. We have seen over the years people proposing two-family dwellings where the two dwellings were essentially identical or nearly so, and they were only connected by, in the most vestigial fashion, or the most marginal fashion with a breezeway or something. And depending on where they were, that was either okay or not very okay. And so what this language does is start with the default that there's a significant portion of a common wall where there's habitable space on both sides that's shared. And if not, then the permit granting body, whoever that is, can say, yes, this is a duplex, so long as there is some structural continuous connection and the architecture in the context of the design review criteria that are used elsewhere, that the proposed structure fits into, is compatible with, in some fashion, the neighborhood in which it is located. The design review criteria are actually quite broad. People who haven't read them imagine it means the house has to look like everything else nearby. It does not. But it has to be compatible in a variety of ways, and it has to be of sound design in its setting. So that section attempts to deal with the question of what is a duplex, and both making sure that new structures are compatible in their settings and allowing for variation in design in places where it matters less, and not necessarily, for instance, discounting or disallowing entirely modern design. Added to this is the same provision that will be added to every other section where rental units are possible, is the provision that requires that all rental dwelling units be registered with the town. And then lastly, there is the third change here is a series of definitions and amendments to existing definitions to try and clarify what all of this is. One of the new ones that's been added is we don't have a definition by itself for what a dwelling unit is. We have always defaulted to what this Commonwealth's building code says a dwelling unit is, but it's not in the bylaw, and what this would do is put it in the bylaw. It's the same language. We're also better defining what a single detached dwelling unit is, we believe. Same thing with a two-family, and defining an on-site resident manager, including some potential regulation for that, and what a principal residence constitutes.
Okay, thank you. Bruce?
I wonder about requiring in the RG district a special permit, since that would be the same in the other residential districts, so the RO and RLD and RN, especially with all of the concern that people are having about the duplexes.
Well, right now, the Class 2 duplex does require a special permit. It's a planning board special permit. There has been discussion of that, and that was one of the items to be discussed this evening as to whether or not it should be a planning board special permit or a zoning board of appeals special permit. A special permit is a special permit. It's the same process. It's the same criteria, whatever board issues it. That was one of the issues to be discussed this evening.
Okay.
Just a couple of,
Microphone.
oh, yeah, right. Couple of comments. Regarding the design part, so I think it's a step in the right direction. I think it would be helpful if we indicated that the intent is that it looks like a single structure, because I think that is generally what the intent is, so that it doesn't have the appearance of two different buildings. Actually, that's my only comment.
Okay, do you have language to propose, or you want to ask?
If I may, there is existing language under subdividable dwelling in the bylaw that speaks specifically to that issue that I think could be just transferred. And let me see if I can find it. Maybe in the definition. Yes, a building constructed for, and it goes on to talk about its purposes, having an external appearance and footprint substantially consistent with those of a one-family detached dwelling.
See a little breathing room.
Yeah, I mean, substantially, I think, is important. So I guess we're not really trying to fool anyone, but on the other hand, we're trying to reduce the impact.
Visually.
Yeah.
I had a couple questions. I understand what we're doing in this draft with the Class 1, Class 2, but could we just have the two categories? I think sort of a draft that I had done a couple weeks ago where it just says owner-occupied in a set of use categories, or investor-owned or non-owner-occupied as a second number, without having to say Class 1 and Class 2, and then have the different use categories for the non-owner occupied, and just do it by different language rather than having to create a Class 1 and a Class 2.
We could do that. That would, just from a sort of a physical and formatting standpoint, that would require reconstructing those aspects, those portions of the use chart, rather than listing this use, that use, that use, that use. You'd run into, it's not really a use category, it's a description of a characteristic of a use, and as the header, and then you'd have all of the uses listed under it, or?
Well, maybe I'm just like where you have standards and conditions for a Class 2 duplex, couldn't it say for a non-owner occupied duplex? You know, I'm looking at your draft. 823. I mean, do we really need to refer to them by class, or can we do it more descriptively with owner-occupied duplex and non-owner-occupied duplex?
If I may, it makes it clearer at one level, and I won't claim all levels, but it makes it clearer at one level if you actually create them as separate use categories, then rather than as, because then you can talk all about that use category if you want to add, change in the future, standards and conditions. Again, one of the useful things in assessing this is to take a look at the way the use chart is currently laid out. And I make no claims for the beauty or the elegance or the function of that layout, but that's what we have.
Yeah, I think it's just, maybe it's a personal preference. I'd rather call it owner-occupied duplex and non-owner-occupied duplex with still the same different use charts, and
Instead of using the heading of
instead of
Class 1.
using Class 1 and Class 2, if it's not necessary. We are creating two classes. We are creating an owner-occupied duplex category with this same set of, the use chart follows as you've drafted, and then we're creating a non-owner occupied duplex, so that you see what it is instead of seeing class 1 or class 2. That's the lead. I don't have a strong feeling about it, but I raise that. I don't know structurally that we need to get into class 1 and class 2. We have two types of duplexes in this proposal. Owner-occupied duplex, where the owner lives in one of the two units, and non-owner occupied duplex with no owner living on the premises.
We have precedent for doing it both ways in the use chart. There are some that are, identified by class, and there are others that are simply
I understand.
enumerated under a heading and
Right.
listed.
So I just wanted to put out that preference and see if the other board members maybe had a preference in using a descriptive name, or class 1 or class 2. Not a big deal.
Hey, go ahead. So the only thing I see is, I think that's probably a good idea. It probably makes sense. It'll be easier for people to understand. The only thing that I could see is if at some point in the future we wanted to do something different with the different kinds of duplexes, and it wasn't, the focus wasn't on who was occupying it, but how the duplex was different from the other in some way. But I don't really see that as imminent or even necessary. So I would support that. It's all just a matter of changing the words at the top of the use.
I think
Yeah.
clearer is the better. I think this is a clear way. Also, I just, personally, I find first class and second class, although it's not exactly called that, to be a little jolting, but.
Communitarian
I know, it's the, combine.
whistles at it.
Okay.
You can certainly do that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I know you didn't want to have a lot of public discussion, but there is somebody in the public who's had her hand up. And
Sure,
it's
go
up
ahead.
to you.
Could you,
Aquifer protection.
N means that it's a not permitted in the aquifer protection district?
It's never.
So where that impinges on RO or ILD, that it's a no, it changes from SB to no.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's,
Yes,
throughout the
that's-
bylaw.
Yeah, the only things that are changing in any of this language, and this is I know it looks like spaghetti, but the only things that are changing are the language that's being lined out, which is being removed, or the language that is in bold italics, which is being added. All other language is existing language.
Another quick question, At least one common wall, and maybe this is an architectural, when is a ceiling also a common wall? Because if it's an up-down duplex, then it's not sharing a
Sure.
wall. And I'm sure there's a word that captures both, I just can't think of it.
Or floor.
Or floor.
Well,
or
it says where,
ceiling.
it specifically says where the dwelling units are arranged side by side.
Oh,
Yeah,
Okay.
so yes.
Okay,
So
all
I
right.
guess if they're not side by side, then they have to be over, or,
Some of them, okay, then it must,
but not necessarily.
We can just take on both sides out and just add or floor.
Yeah,
I
not-
think that would do it.
yeah, that was really, I just landed on that word. And just before we get into substance, another question, on the definition residence principal, there's new language that says primary residential domicile, and I know where that's going, but is that different than just saying primary residence of an individual? Because then you define what it is.
You try not to, that's an aesthetic or grammarian approach. You try not to use the same words to define a thing that, try not to say that a cow is a cow
Well,
that has, different
and
terms.
residential domicile seems clunky. Primary residence has somewhat of a common meaning, and then it's a different sense. For the purpose of this bylaw, principal residence or primary residence, whichever, maybe they should be consistent. So, I don't know that the word domicile adds anything.
what if you took out residential? What if it just said the primary domicile? Is that better?
I know, domicile's a funny word, right?
Yeah.
This is,
Yeah, that
Yeah.
it
It's
is
sort of
redundant,
class.
actually. It is redundant.
I just,
Primary domicile of,
sounds like,
Yeah.
okay.
just, or I think, or Mr. Shriver is going, or primary residence.
Yeah.
Because domicile is kind of like a throwback word that doesn't add any.
We like to
Take
throw
out-
back.
I know you like the word. I suggest we take out domicile and go with residence or residency.
Bruce, do you have any strong feelings about that?
I'd go with the primary residence, yeah.
So I have a question. Let's say the duplex is a condo, so it's separately owned. So there's two different owners. Well, that, this would be a class 1 or a class 2? There'd be class 1, right?
Class 1.
Okay, so owner number 1 rents his or hers, so it's still class 1?
No, change, if the minute it's rented and it's not the,
But one of the two units is owner occupied, so
but it's not occupied by the owner.
then who goes to the, okay, so, yeah, so it's a condo, one of the two rents, so it becomes a class 2. Who goes to the permit granting authority to get
The owner,
the owner of the one that's being rented?
yes.
I don't think so. I think it depends what we do with single-family. I think they're each treated as single-family residences with a shared wall. So it doesn't really meet, I think, the operational
Yeah, zero.
definition of that we're using. Sort of ownership-wise, it's a condex, but you have two separate owners. One rents theirs out, one's in residence. And so you treat it, I think you treat one side as a single-family owner-occupied and the other side as a single-family non-owner-occupied.
There is a definition in the bylaw, dwelling unit, 0 lot line. A single-family unit sited on one or more lot lines with no yard along these lot lines. So you can have,
But
if they're separately owned, they might well, as Connie said, be considered single-family, 0 lot line dwellings.
So this is different than a zero lot line, because
different.
it is, a zero lot line assumes that there's a lot line, that, and this could be a, stacked duplex.
Maybe it's implied, but
question.
I think
That's a
it
good question.
assumes one owner for both units.
Yeah.
I think,
Yes.
but it may be just, we're making that assumption, because you're right, we could get caught up.
That's a very good question.
Does that need to go into the definition, or?
And so if I'm an applicant and I come before a permit granting authority and I want to build a 2-unit condominium, and I'm going to sell both sides, is that going to be permitted as, is the permit I'm obtaining a duplex, or is it something else? Because that's where I think it's going to
If
end up
it's-
unclear.
That's 3.
I think if it's separate owners, then it's, and not as a duplex, it would be as a non-owner occupied single-family dwelling.
No,
We
but
have-
what permit am I getting? I'm building a 2-family, both to be sold.
Oh, to be sold individually.
I'm building, I'm a developer, I'm building 2, and I'm selling them both, and I have two bona fide offers, 2 people move in, one moves out and rents the unit.
That's a very good question, and it's not addressed under the current language, because right now, the single-family category, when we get there, does not anticipate that, nor does the duplex.
Something to think about.
Very good point.
I can put in my pitch that I think that it should be treated as, if it's separately owned units, one's rented, the other one's not, I think it should still be a class 1, because the intent of having at least one of the 2 units owner occupied is met.
Okay, if I
You
can,
don't have the,
if I could pursue this, I'm the developer and I want a permit to build 2 units that I'm going to sell. So at one point in time, there is an owner occupant, but then later, both of the condo owners move out, better jobs in Texas, and they're both rented out, then what happens?
Yeah, then it's definitely class, well,
So what permit am I applying for? Because I can't guarantee one or the other, and you wouldn't want to say, you had to vacate the condex if you weren't living there, you know, if you weren't in residence.
I think what we would, the first thing that occurs to me is to expand the single-family category to 3, one of which anticipates dealing with condominiums, multiple condominiums in individual,
Condexes.
in larger buildings, whether it's 2 or more units. Let us chew on that.
Okay.
I was just going to say that I would assume that the developer would apply for single-family because it's not the developer's knowledge of what's going to happen once the people buy it, and then when they buy it, if they would rent it, then they would have to ask for a Class 2 license from the town, just as anybody would when they're renting a property. I would assume.
But I'm an owner and I want to rent out my condo. Whatever the rules are that we end up with for single-family homes are what I'd have to follow. So if I'm renting it and I have to register or do whatever, I would do that. And other single-family homeowners with separate lots don't, then I don't.
I think we would have to deal with it under the single family because the bylaw as it stands, and we don't want to get into introducing this, does not deal with ownership at all. It just deals with what is the use. And is it a single? Is it a double? What is it? And I think what we would do is right now the title for the use category under single family is single family detached dwellings. And I think we would change that to single family dwellings. And then have 3 classes instead of 2. The first 2 would be detached dwellings. The third would be a 0 lot line.
It's still not a 0 lot
No.
line or townhouse, or because the 0 lot line, assumes there's a party wall right on the lot line.
Or, yep, okay,
Yeah.
right. We can do it either way. We could write it
Yeah.
in such a manner that it would address both instances.
It might be just that there's a note in either class, whatever we're calling the duplex, that in a case where both units are
Under separate
separately
ownership.
owned, then blank happens. And I'm not sure what blank is, but
Right. Just to note, we have a number of what I call condexes, or 2-family with separate ownerships throughout the town, and a number of affordable home ownership projects have used them. There's one off of Amity Street, it's Charles Lane, is that one? Has some, and over on, what's it called, the little village off of Old Belchertown Road, Paley Village, has them because it's a way to have home ownership in a 2-family configuration, so it's more affordable. And each owner of that condex owns the property in common and the roof in common, and they own, just like any other condominium, that one year. So they're only a condominium association of 2 households. So we've actually used that a lot, so it's not just abstract.
So, yeah, it's not unusual. There's one going through the permit process right now.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's pretty cool. Further discussion of duplexes. I'd like to discuss, well, first of all, I guess I'd like to know whether there's a consensus of the committee, whether we actually do want to pursue this 2 different uses, whether they're called classes or have 2 separate titles, whatever. Is there an objection to that? There's some members of the public have suggested that that's not a good idea. I don't know whether that is because of the language or the actual breaking them apart. But how does the board feel about that? Okay, so there's no objection going forward.
Yeah.
Okay, so we ought to discuss which permitting body is appropriate if the class 2, for want of a better term right now, is to be by special permit. And Connie, could I ask you to provide a defense of why you suggested?
Well, for the non-owner occupied category, I had suggested or put out, at least for consideration, the planning board be the special permit granting authority. Partly because the board is so immersed in this set of issues, to be hearing these cases over the next amount of time, I think really helps understand what's going on across a number of neighborhoods. And looking at the bylaw, we have a number of special permit uses that are zoning board. The planning board is equally capable of doing a special permit review, and it just seems out of balance that the planning board could sort of share some of that workload, and this would be an appropriate set of permitting uses that the board could have. We've been working on this a lot, and so then you have the consistency of one board dealing with all the different two-family uses. That was kind of what I was trying for with my draft, but I don't know if I was clear. So that's my thinking, but I know that at other times, sort of politically or historically, people have strong feelings about which board is the permit granting authority, and that one is better than the other. And I don't really want to get into a political battle over this. It doesn't matter that much. I see some rationale for doing this across the board as special permit planning board, but if it's going to burn a lot of political capital on what we're actually trying to do, which is improve conditions in some neighborhoods, I'm not going to hold on to that, but I thought it was worth the conversation.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I would just note as, also just tossing the information on the pile here, that the ZBA is extremely busy. Their liaison, who is present, can speak to that. We are now actually hiring a part-time person to help us transcribe recordings of the meetings in order to get the decisions done on time. We've got a backlog of decisions. We're still within all the statutory time periods, but we've got a backlog of decisions because there are so many special permits coming in, and many of them are in this category. That's not to say that you don't have enough to do. You have more than enough to do. But I have to say I sort of agree generally with Connie's approach that if we could create a consistency where smaller multiple unit and less impactful multiple unit residential uses were by planning board special permit, and the larger, more impactful, more serious multi-unit residential uses would be by special permit in those districts where it was appropriate, by ZBA special permit. But that, again, I agree with Connie. It's not worth having a major arm wrestling session over. It may be something we need to have a conversation with over a period of time, or about over a period.
Just to follow up, if people concur that at least there's a reasonableness to going for this, we can certainly hear public comment about it at the public hearing, and the full board may or may not want to continue on. And if the full board wants to go for special permit planning board, we get to town meeting, it's certainly easy enough for someone to make an amendment to that if there's a strong feeling, and town meeting can decide. So I don't know that we have to weigh the political calculus at this point, because we're going to find out.
Are you saying that you think it could be amended, if the article is written as special permit planning board, it could be amended the other way, or vice versa at town meeting? You think that's within the scope? Is it?
Oh, yeah.
So that's good.
It's a special permit. It's a special permit. It's not, in terms of this question of scope, just a question of who's issuing it. It doesn't, in fact, change the scope one way or another.
It wouldn't change the language in the body of what we're looking at for the amendment either.
But we still want to actually propose something.
Oh, you're right. So I'm saying, right now, I don't know that we need to
Okay.
not do it, but just personally, I don't know that if that's the battleground issue, which way it'll fall. And there isn't, I mean, in terms of workload, writing the decisions still goes to somebody in the planning department, regardless of which board.
That's true, yeah. Yeah, I guess I would also point out that the way the current draft is written, it suggests that a planning board special permit would be issued in RVC and RG, but it would be ZBA in the other residential districts, and I'm not sure that captures all of the scope that you're trying to address. I mean, we've heard that there are, rentals and conversions going on in are in neighborhoods as well, so.
No, you're right. I think what I had done was suggest change where it was site plan review, making it a discretionary use rather than a by right use, and didn't change what was currently special permit already, discretionary spec. You're right, if we, to be consistent, all the site plan, the special permits here would go to, they would all become SPP. And that would actually be more rational.
Would you do that with the owner-occupied in the outlying districts as well?
But we're not changing it.
That's true.
Not, no, because we're not changing that.
Steve, did you have your hand up?
No.
So, I guess this is an interesting dilemma. I'm not really sure which way I feel about it. I would like to, I think I would suggest that we propose a regular ZBA special permit for the Class 2 duplex, at least on our working documents right now, and maybe in the public comment period of the next few planning board meetings, we'll hear otherwise, or the planning board will want to pursue something else. But I feel like it's a, as Connie pointed out, it's possibly a distraction from the actual point of this article, which is to start protecting neighborhoods.
I would defer to you on this.
So,
For what?
I defer to the position of the chair on this issue for now, that they would all become special permit rather than, or all be, instead of the way it's drafted, or instead of all of them being special permit planning board. But I'm sure you will share this conversation with the planning board, and if there's some strong sentiment.
Mm.
Still a moving target.
yes. Right. Quickly, is there any comment? Could you come forward and speak on the microphone, because we're being taped for broadcast.
Laura Fitch, Precinct 1. I don't understand the on-site resident manager definition. Like, I don't understand full-time.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna talk about that. I actually just wanted to, if there was any comment about the decisions that we've made, or the tentative decisions that we've made. We'll talk about that. Okay, quickly, if it's on point.
The domicile, it looks like your definition would allow somebody physically not to have to be there, as long as they file their tax returns, have mail sent, have their driver's license, etc. So if you want to avoid that risk, you need to address the problem that there has to be evidence of physically being there for, typically it's over 6 months during the year. That's the usual test for whether there is a principal residence. But there's nothing about physical presence in your description. Now,
We're
His in the last box.
okay.
so a clever person could have their son living there or his friend living there and keep all the stuff there. So I don't think it's going to be typical, but there's a lot of manipulation going on in town, and I think if you really want to make sure that it is somebody's primary residence, one crucial aspect is that you actually live there at least more than half the time of the year. And there are always exceptions, people on sabbatical, you can deal with that, but that piece is not there.
Stucker.
We started with a measure of duration in this definition, and the discussions, at least preliminarily, indicated that there were any number of circumstances under which perfectly reasonable absences for a period of time from someone's principal residence might exceed any of the durations we talked about. The problem with establishing duration is that the only way to do it is over a period of time. You would have, over a period of 5 years, they averaged, 9 months or more, in the home, and that there's just not a way to have that be a workable criteria and still be reasonable. You can't have 6 months out of every year, because there are going to be instances where, perfectly reasonable instances, within which people would be be absent for that period of time. Just to address something else, the presence of a family member does not constitute primary residence at all.
I
The
understand.
owner of the property is the one who has
But
to be
you're
present.
suggesting that the exception should be then, should prevail, rather than, the usual thing is that somebody lives there, and there are then exceptions, and you could draw in the right of anybody to review so that reasonable exceptions can be made, but without physically requiring a physical presence for tax purposes, for example, you must prove that you are physically there. That's why people go to Florida for, half the year plus a day. So that is something that is ministered throughout the country through the tax laws, et cetera.
So I'm not an expert on this, but there certainly are lots of people that own 3 houses and then split the time 1/3 between each of those. And everyone's allowed to have, everyone can have a principal residence where they can vote, and it's basically the center of your civic life. So
Right.
if I own 10 houses and I spend 1/10 of my time at each of those houses, I can still choose one of those as my principal residence. So I think the point is well taken, but I think that there are other ways that there are measurements as to whether or not that's your principal residence. Are you registered to vote there? Is it the center of your civic? I think you actually said this in an email, what some of the measures are: center of civic life, center of business life.
That's attempted to be captured in the language that's there. Evidence of a preponderance of the following
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
indices, which includes voters' registration, the filing of taxes. If the requirement in terms of residency for filing of taxes is tied to duration of occupation there, then the criteria itself, without naming it, pulls duration in as a measure. There's going to be, you cannot construct, I'll tell you right now, you cannot construct a perfect definition of principal residence through which you prevent people from finding clever ways to deceptively not be there and rent out a property. You can't do that. Which is why we keep coming back to the fact that zoning is not the primary tool with which we are going to address the problem that these zoning amendments are starting to try to address. It's going to be rental regulations, licenses to operate a rental property that does that work, not this.
I don't know if you want to take public comment or you want the board, because I don't want to cut off somebody.
I don't want to take too much public comment because I
Well, I was just going to say, when I read this, it puts the burden of making the decision on the enforcement officer, and I'm actually okay with that, and then it gives some examples of evidence, because I'm basically agreeing with you. I'm happy to move on from what we have drafted here. I'm content with this, that it gives a working definition of principal residence, and it's not the place where we're going to solve everything.
Right. I think the issue is not so much what is the right definition of principal residence, but how can we make sure that a dwelling that is owner-occupied or a duplex that is owner-occupied actually means that the owner is living there. So I mean, I think that's
I don't know, I think that the enforcement of some of these things are, with the best of intentions and language, how do you prove 6 people are living there when only 4 are allowed to? I mean, it becomes an enforcement issue, and whatever those mechanisms are, but I don't know that we can get it all.
Tom.
So I'm Tom Airgood. I'm the ZBA liaison. As the ZBA liaison, that means that I keep my fellow board members apprised of the developments of these discussions, and I prepare them for a sort of discussion that we'll have a meeting on September 10th with Mr. Tucker and others, at which the ZBA will, as a board, will state various views. And but since I sit here on these issues and since I see that members of the ZSC make personal comments, I'll make a personal comment on this jurisdiction issue. And that is, I find that, I will say that the rationale that Ms. Kruger is putting forward for planning board permitting of these non-owner occupied residences, I think is very powerful. I think consistency is very important, and consistency within a board that is considering these rules from, in the development of them, and then in the application of them. I think those are very important considerations. There may be reasons that the ZBA that it should be split. I'd like to think that those aren't really political ones, and if they are, those aren't considerations that I can sort of understand myself. So I just wanted to say that I think this discussion is all very good. Thank you.
Please.
Hi, Mike Dietrich, Precinct 10. I just have one suggestion for an addition on the principal residence. Right now, if you interpret preponderance to mean majority of evidence, it's possible that you could fill in 4 of these entities and not be actually on site. So you could definitely have the mortgage. You could claim that as your mailing address. You could definitely have a telephone listing. And you could interpret filing of taxes to be filing of real estate taxes. And now you're an owner-occupier. If you change that to filing of personal income taxes, that becomes I think, closer in line with the owner-occupied provision.
Okay, thank you.
I would think, excuse me,
Yep.
that homestead exemption would be an important one also.
Okay, so Ms. Fitch raised a good question about on-site resident manager. That's part of the standards and conditions, possible standards and conditions for the Class 2 duplex. And it is an interesting question that we need to look at. So, as written, as drafted, the Class 2 duplex says the presence of an on-site resident manager shall be required as a condition of approval.
If I may,
Please.
what this does is establish sort of a default and a fallback. It first defines what a resident manager is, and that definition is taken and massaged from a variety of definitions used in real estate law and elsewhere. And then it says you have the option, based on the discretion of the permit granting body, for an on-site resident manager to qualify as being present or functioning in terms of a specific use for more than one use. That they live in one use, and they may operate up to 5, a total of 5. They may manage a total of 5 properties, so long as a number of criteria are met, most of which have to do with distance, that they're not, 3 towns away.
I missed the shall. I would propose that we change that to may.
Where's this?
Where you have, for Class 2, for a non-owner occupied duplex, the presence of an on-site manager shall be required. I would say may be required, which is what we were working on in our earlier drafts, and some members of the public said they would like it to be must or shall, and we had said may be a requirement, so that can be a condition placed on by the permit grant, but it does not have to be put on. So I would prefer to go back to the other default, which was the may.
So it's a judgment called by the permit granting body.
Yeah, but it's an option.
Is that a consensus among the board members?
I would ask whether that means that the permanent granting body can deny the permit if they decide that a resident manager is necessary, but no evidence of resident manager is provided. Does putting may in there?
If you say may be required as a condition of approval, you are saying that can be a condition of approval, and if it's not met and the board feels it should be met, then the permit can be denied.
Okay, I just want to be clear about that.
I would prefer to start with that, which is already adding a stringency over what we have now.
Okay, what about the definition of on-site resident manager, the particular conditions, 5, a mile, residence? Do those all make sense? I guess I'm not really sure. I don't, are those random numbers, particularly the mile and the 5?
Well,
Or
they're not random, but they are created.
Question, why do we care about the miles? I mean, I've
Has to
done
do with
property management, and that's pretty arbitrary, and we're getting into some real
Has-
micromanagement of how this gets done.
And that may be the consensus of the subcommittee, and that's fine. It was an attempt to say, if there's an issue at one of the properties, the manager can get there within a reasonable time. It may be that you may determine that, within the town of Amherst, doesn't matter where you live, you could get somewhere else in the town of Amherst within, 10 minutes, and that's enough.
I would suggest we just, where your clause, where said uses are located within X miles of the manager's residence, that comma become a period.
Serves as their principal residence,
Because you still
period.
have the enforcement of, if there's a number of violations and it's not being well managed and the manager is falling down on the job, you have an enforcement, we hope to have an enforcement mechanism even stronger than what we have now. And so I just think we're setting ourselves up to fail with how we can manage this bylaw.
So it would end at principal residence? And we'll take the distance criteria.
You're describing how many they can manage, and then if you put the period there, you don't have to deal with the distance.
Right. How about adding the phrase, just, again, for the sake of blinding obviousness, no more than 5 separate residential uses within the town of Amherst? Because someone's going to say, well, I operate one, they're operating one in Belchertown too, they shouldn't be.
I was thinking of something very similar because that's the one that we have control over, because we'll have rental registration with the manager's name on it. And so otherwise it becomes an unenforceable.
Yeah, another setup to fail.
If the permit granting body has discretion over requiring an on-site resident manager or not, could it not also say that as a condition that resident manager, can only manage 4 or can only manage 6 or has to be within 2 miles? Could that also be a condition?
If it's a special permit, you can do anything you want. If it's a site plan review approval, then whatever the language is that's here determines the parameters. I'm sorry, am I close enough to the microphone? Could people hear me?
Has that condition ever been put on anyone, or that they could only manage a certain number of properties?
No.
This is
Not
really
that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I was just thinking if the on-site resident manager, by definition, to me, that would seem to indicate on the side of the duplex, but if he or she's allowed to manage up to 12 scattered in different places, then wouldn't that manager possibly become a company, such as one of the companies we already have in town managing, rather than a person?
Well, the manager is going to be a person one way or another. They may or may not work for a property management company. They may be their own company. They may be somebody's employee.
I think you found a hole, Bruce, because some of these properties are managed by professional companies, and this would, in a way, be contradictory to that. And I think I'm going to take a position that we are micromanaging this too much, and to take that out as well, because we're moving towards an enforcement system which we think is the primary solution. And instead of adding all these very specific, hoping we can manage how well something is managed, I would much rather see the energy go into good enforcement when there's problems than trying to construct how somebody does their business.
Yeah.
Would that then make sense to sentence end at 12 units? Or at house or townhouse use? If we ended at townhouse use, then you've taken all of the specificity, fussy or otherwise, out of it.
I personally would be happier just having the requirement for an on-site manager and let them figure out how to manage their other duties.
I'm still trying to decide whether or not we're talking about having this definition in here. If all of the rest of that comes out, then you're really only talking about the first
Yes,
sentence.
that's what I'm talking about.
Okay. That's what I needed to understand.
Excuse me, Mr. Schreiber, does the resident manager have to live in the property? I mean, is that, because it doesn't make sense, because you're managing 5, so you're not living in all 5. So we want good management. Why are we mandating that my employed resident manager, who I'm assigning management duties, has to live in one of the units? And I just, again, I think that we're using the wrong tools to get to the problem.
But maybe if I may, but doesn't resident on-site manager mean that they actually live in the,
Yes, that's
Yeah.
that's what
Live in.
she's questioning.
Live-in resident, which, so we have a contradictory thing going on anyway. If I
Well, we
live in
were-
one, then I can
again,
manage 12 or.
We were starting with that as the default and then going on to say, if the permit granting body said it was okay, then that person could also manage other properties, which was edging its way towards having this being a property management company. If you don't want it to be on-site resident manager, but you do want the option to add a condition that the property be managed professionally, then we need to change the last sentence of the standards and conditions under this and maybe take this,
I think,
the-
I'm sorry.
change the definition.
I think the intent is to have an actual person in the building who's the designated manager, almost like a resident assistant or something.
Right.
And so it could be done by deputizing one of the, in other words,
Right.
one of the tenants.
Right.
But that tenant then has extra responsibilities of,
And the complaint, which much of the rest of this was of the creep out into how do you do it, regulation was an attempt to respond to, was you've got 4 students, one of them just is told he's the manager. He's got a couple of phone numbers to call if there's a problem, that's it. That's not management. That's what this is a response to. You're welcome to respond back to that.
So,
What other people think.
so let me see if I understand what Steve is saying. You're saying keep the on-site resident manager may be required, but not define it any more than just say an on-site resident manager is someone who lives there.
Yeah.
So the permitting granting body can require that someone actually be living there, or they cannot.
I also think that there's something that was mentioned when we had the building commissioner, the health department, and the housing enforcement officer here, that in some communities, it's required to post, the name of the manager plus the phone number, 24-hour contact of the
And again,
state law.
I think it's in the sanitary code.
It's in the sanitary code that be posted inside, but she was saying that it be posted
Outside,
outside. So,
that's the kind of thing that would happen under rental regulations, under
Yeah.
licensing. Yeah,
Say that again. It would be posted on the outside of the structure,
that is the kind of thing
kind of thing. Yeah.
that rental regulations can require.
Like, don't like my driving, or don't like
Yeah,
my
yeah, yeah.
management,
Right.
call, and then it's some number in Tucson.
1-800 get a
1-800 bad rental or something.
how's my driving?
How's
my management?
I have a further question about the rental permitting or registration system. The registration would be on the unit, is that right? Would there be any registration or licensing of managers? So in other words, could you just say you're, a resident there, you're the manager, Or would that person have to have some license as well?
It would be under a rental regulation licensing system done through the general bylaws. It would be the person finding the license or obtaining the license. Under zoning, it attaches more to the property and more to the unit. So that's part of the distinction here. And it's one of the reasons why, again, zoning does one thing, general bylaws do another.
So is the town, is part of the proposal of the town is developing to license managers, not property owners, but managers of rental properties?
To license
Or qualify them or register them or
parties
something?
to operate rental units, whether that's a property owner, whether that's in some instances might be a property management company, whoever it is, it becomes, ultimately under law, even if you have intermediaries and representatives and so forth, it's the owner of the property who ends up being responsible. So the license goes to the owner can then authorize their representative or property management person to do whatever, but it's the owner.
I think with that in mind, I don't think they would want some irresponsible person to be the manager, because then that might involve the company being fined. So I would be comfortable leaving the language of may require a resident manager, but leaving out the rest about how many units they could do and so forth.
Yeah, and what we would be left with is the substitution of the word may in the standard and conditions, and then under the definition would be shortened to resident manager, and then would just include the first sentence.
Yes.
Rental, in fact, at the end, for the rental units under their charge, the S would be in parens, just.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Okay, are there any other issues under duplex? Any other definitions? Dwelling unit single, dwelling unit two-family that anyone wants to talk about? Okay.
Do you want to hear from?
A couple of people.
Yeah, sure.
can wait.
Go ahead. Ms. Burgess.
Joan Burgess, Precinct 9. I want to stress the on-site resident manager is extremely important, and by virtue of the fact that it says on-site, that's what I think is the most important part of this. If there's any problem with the property, somebody on site's going to hear the noise at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm not going to have to call the police. They should be hearing it. So 5 miles away or 24 units and all that stuff doesn't play in. It needs to be on site. That's the whole purpose. And I mean, by virtue of the fact that it's in the first words, I think if it's for 1 unit or 24 units, it should be on site.
Second row here.
Gordon Wise. One question, I thought I heard you saying that the owner could designate one of the renters to be the manager. I'm a little concerned or leery about, if you have a place that's occupied by 4 or 8 students, just designating one of these students to be the manager pro tem. I'd be concerned about trying to shore that up a little. And Connie, my second point, Ms. Kruger said that this feels like micromanaging because we're going toward another system of permitting or registering owners of rental properties, but I just want to point out that we're not there yet. And until we are there, and we don't know how that's going to play in this way, we need to do the best we can for regulations in the meanwhile. Thank you.
Back.
Mike Stutzman, Precinct 8. I just think there's a little bit of confusion in the language here about units and uses, and it seems to me that the scope given to the authority of the resident manager is a bit confused, because if I read it right, the intent is that a manager of a use where you have 12 units or less may, since they're in the proximity of those 12 units, manage up to 5 of those. But then you say you can be within a mile away, so it seems like there's two different things trying to be accomplished here, and they're countering each other.
Yeah, I think we recognize the confusion there, and what we're currently considering is dropping all but the first sentence of that definition. So none of those considerations would be part of what is defining an on-site resident manager.
Dropping the first sentence?
No, keeping the first sentence. So the definition is of an on-site resident manager is someone who lives there.
Oh, that certainly makes
Period.
sense. And I
That's
think
all.
if you cut out the second half of the second sentence, that's even reasonable to say if you have a large building with more than 2 residences in it, someone could conceivably manage up to 5 of those. But to say they can manage something a mile away seems a bit of a stretch. So,
Well, that's being removed.
thank you.
If I may, just as a matter of zoning language has specific terms of art, terms of meaning. Dwelling units is not the same as uses. Residential use can have 24 dwelling units in it or 1. So if the resident manager, as originally envisioned here, was resident in a small apartment complex that had up to 12 units and was living there, they could also be managing, as that was originally conceived, other residential uses that were rental properties that were
Let's just
distanced
say-
from that site. That was the original picture. As was said, that's all been removed. But I just wanted to make sure that the people understand the difference between a residential use, which is whatever the use category is on whatever property, and dwelling units. One use can have many dwelling units.
Does it not seem reasonable to limit the scope of the manager's authority to units rather than uses?
Depends.
That was my only thought, because if he's allowed, say if you kept that language and someone was allowed to oversee 5 uses, and those uses can be the same number of units as the manager's own residence, that's 72 units, so.
Well, the presence of an on-site resident manager is a condition that the permitting body can impose or not. And then they can further condition that as they see fit. So I think it's intended to be flexible so that they can be as strict as they want in the right places and as broad as they want in the right places. That's the intent of the tinkering that we're doing, I think.
Okay, thank you.
So we're talking about duplexes here too, not apartment complexes.
Oh, and I would mention on that note that duplex only, as I think was mentioned with the addition of a third class or not class, duplex only refers to 2 units in a
Right,
building. So that doesn't really foresee the zoning relating to more than 2 units in a structure.
Well, if I may, although this entire amendment is principally about duplexes, one section of it was adding a number of definitions to the zoning bylaw, some of which were not addressing just duplexes. They were addressing issues associated with duplexes. And the resident manager is the manager of whatever, whether it's a duplex, and in fact they were listed there. Duplex, converted dwelling, apartments, or townhouses. It was intended to be broader. It's now been made broad by being made simple. So
I would also echo the concern that to the extent that you're addressing structures and not individual units, there was the concern about ownership changing and therefore someone's rights and the classification of their property changing based on another, say you've got 4 condos in a building, there's 3 owner-occupied, someone goes to rental, and then the other 3 owner-occupieds are now subject to.
that's one, we addressed that with an earlier conversation, and we're going to be reworking the language to try and address that question where you have individual ownerships of single units in a multi-unit structure that are variously owned. We're intending to do that.
Okay.
One more.
Laura Fitch, Precinct 1. I'm still not real clear about the management. So it says a full-time. What does full-time mean? Is that somebody that's paid 40 hours? Is that somebody that can't leave at night to go to a party because they have to be there around the clock? So, or if they can't go on vacation. And the other thing is that I guess I'm more interested in a management plan than who the actual person is that's administering it. So I'd like there to be a plan that says, thou shalt not party after 10 o'clock or whatever, you know, and the enforcement mechanisms for that. So then once you have that plan in place, I don't really care if it's a management company or somebody that happens to live there. And in the management plan, it could say how they intend to enforce it.
I think you're right. That's a management plan is a requirement of a site plan review and a special permit hearing. So the time to address those issues is in the hearing for the specific permit, I think. And so this, I think your concern is met by this language. In other words, it allows whoever the permitting body is to say, we need to see the management plan, we need to approve the management plan, and if we think a manager should be there as well, then we're going to impose that, if they want to.
It still doesn't answer the question about full-time, I guess.
Yeah, that's.
I think full-time is,
Whether that's, you know,
yeah.
6 months of the year or 12 months of the year.
But I think full-time is, as you described it, 24/7, and whether or not they're actually there, they can go away, but they need to be reachable. I mean, just like a manager of anything needs to be reachable. So I do think that I see full-time as meaning all the time.
How is that different than live-in? Because if you're live-in, then you're full-time in that sense, but you're going to visit your mother on the weekend. So is it redundant with the live-in
Yeah,
resident?
maybe, might be. But I think the live-in is actually more important.
Yeah, so.
'Cause if you're
could we
living
say
in,
A
then-
live-in resident of a rental, could we just take out full-time?
Yeah.
Because that's terms of employment.
Because you might have two people share a job. Even share.
Say it again, what are you
Yeah, right.
suggesting?
1.0 FT.
Was a suggestion made that I didn't quite catch?
We're taking the term full-time out.
A live-in resident. Okay.
Live-in resident, a residential use responsible for managing and coordinating the maintenance, housekeeping, and administrative duties for the rental units under their charge.
Tom.
Tom Airgood, ZBA liaison. I'd like to pick up on your comment, Mr. Crowner, about the management plans being dealt with in individual hearings, and suggest that maybe you should consider saying something about contents of a management plan. And the suggestion that was made, for example, that the management plan might limit the parties after certain hours. I don't know whether that really is a good thing or possible thing to do, but I think you might consider that. Is it possible that a permitting board could actually, how would I say, define a house as a non-party house? If you're really going to have real teeth in management plans, it might help for you to do something to support those teeth. And I would say, from a personal perspective, sitting on a permitting board, that sometimes these management plans come and who knows what they come with a lot of variety, and maybe I sort of extol the benefits of consistency in terms of the jurisdiction for permitting, and maybe there's some benefits of thinking of management plans in what you're doing.
Are you suggesting that language be added to the zoning bylaw describing what a management plan should look like? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I am saying I agree with Ms. Kruger that it's a little tricky to put a lot of this micromanagement into these amendments. But while you're at it, the management plan is a very important framework here, and we're talking about rental registration as some far off vehicle or instrument for managing some of the ways these residential properties are operated. And I think you have really, in the management plan, you have an instrument, a vehicle that allows you to do it there, and maybe you can help to develop what that might be.
I hear where you're going, and right now it's a required submission in the permit application. It doesn't go into great detail, but we've been getting at that by asking for the lease and trying to come up with criteria of what we're actually wanting to look at when we review a lease. And that's where I would see the most teeth residing, where I'm looking for a lease that says if you violate the keg bylaw, you cannot have parties or gatherings of more than 10 people. I've seen language in a number of leases that gives some very tight parameters, and rather, I think it belongs maybe in a kind of guidelines or rules and regs kind of thing, not necessarily in the bylaw. And we're learning what we're looking for when we ask for a lease, or perhaps learning what we're looking for when we ask for a management plan, because just asking for it is only half of the job, because we want something that says the landlord has created the ability to evict you if you have parties of more than 20 people or something like that.
Mr. Tucker.
This is part of the challenge in doing zoning amendments is always that the majority of the iceberg is under the water and invisible. The planning board has existing, as does the ZBA, existing rules and regulations that are established. They're enabled to do this under state law that tell applicants what it is they have to submit and how they go through the process of submitting and going through the process of public hearing. And it is in those requirements for what it is that you're supposed to submit that gives the boards the opportunity to say, here's a hole, or here's something that needs to be addressed in greater specificity. As Ms. Kruger was saying, the planning board has started looking at leases. The staff that are working with the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Initiative are looking at this question too, trying to find sort of the best practices, model leases, as well as the best and most complete set of requirements that you would ask of someone who's operating a rental property, the kind of information that the board has to have in order to make a good judgment about what they're actually proposing. So that happens entirely outside of what is written in the bylaw. It's not even there. That's part of the rest of the iceberg. But I assure you it's there, and it's being worked on.
This is the last question. I'd like to proceed through a couple more points. Go ahead.
Janet Keller, Precinct 1. I would just like to support those number of people have spoken to whatever it is you do. Let's remember who collects the money and who collects the beer cans and looks at the house that isn't being maintained. So whatever is in your power, be that model management plan, requiring a management plan, and then providing a model management plan, requiring a lease that meets, doesn't really matter as long as it changes that dynamic. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if it's really short, because I'd like to move on, we want to close up soon.
Mike Dietrich, Precinct 10. I currently live next to a house that is a rental that's had a management plan that the ZBA put into effect, and it has had no effect whatsoever on behavior. It is the second highest call volume house for complaints in our neighborhood, according to Rolf Karlstrom's data. So I see, to me, it's useless.
So we need to do a better job of requiring management plans that make sense, that do the job that Ms. Keller is asking us to do.
Someone has to enforce
And then they have to be
language.
enforced, exactly, yes.
Right. So for instance, right now, does the building inspector have the ability to actually enter a premises and do an inspection?
The building commissioner does not, but our code enforcement officer does, as does the health director and anyone who is enforcing health codes, public health codes.
That would be powerful.
I'm sorry, but has a complaint been lodged with the building commissioner about this property? Because they don't know that there's a violation occurring. It's real hard to enforce it. Somebody should just let them know by email.
It's just noise and nuisance calls.
Okay, what, yes, what?
I think it's incumbent on the surrounding neighbors to know exactly what the maze is. We have to navigate who to call. For the property and many others, but certainly the one that he's talking about, the police have been called numerous times. I mean, we're just going around in circles. I mean, everyone knows what the problem is, and I think we know what the solution is. It's not that complicated. But, you know, you call the police, you call the building enforcement, you try and get in touch with the property management company, you try and get in touch with the owner of the property, and then to be told, well, there's maybe a seventh person down the list who's really the person that needs to be contacted. It should just be much simpler than that. Any one of the logical people that the neighbors would call when there's a nuisance that occurs, you know, on a multiple weekly basis, one of those obvious parties should be able to help solve the problem. And to be told that there's somebody else that we've never thought about, I mean, you know, underscores the problem in and of itself.
I think, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it may not seem that the message is getting through because nothing is happening right now, but I think the message is getting through. I think people are hearing you. And I think from what I understand from having listened to planning staff and the health department staff and the inspection staff, I think that procedures are being developed that in the future you will be able to call one person and that person will direct it to the right person. I feel like that's coming, but I agree that it's frustrating that it's not there now.
My concern about the health department, if there should only be 5 people living, 4 people, whatever the number is in a residence, and the health department goes in and there's 6, that may not be a health violation.
If I may, the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Initiative is on the town website. On that web page is a place where you can file a complaint, and it goes directly to all of the enforcement personnel. If a health inspector goes in and notes a violation of other law, there's several garbage bags full of pot in the corner, they let the police know. If the police go in responding to a noise complaint and they can tell that the place is falling down and it's unsafe to live in, they let the health folks know. So there is coordination now.
I've been told that the property owner is not responsible till they've been notified that there's been a violation or that there's been a call to the police. And maybe it's the 3rd call. When the police come, they only notify, it only starts to go through this very cumbersome channel for the property owner to be notified if an arrest is made. Most of the time, arrest is not made. They tell the kids to quiet down. They see kids drinking underage, they're not arresting them, so it never gets to the property owner.
That sounds like if the only thing that's issue that's rising up is noise and parties, then the laws being enforced are the laws that the police enforce. They're not, unless there's some other public health or safety question.
It's a maze that it's not that complicated.
It is that complicated because...
But it doesn't need to be that complicated. So there's no way, the landlord's not responsible till the landlord's notified, but the landlord's not going to be notified unless there's arrest. There's really never an arrest, so the landlord's never notified. So we literally have not gotten beyond square one. I just don't understand what's so complicated.
Maybe, Mr. Tucker, you could speak to someone after.
I'd be happy to.
Because
Email me during the day.
We're running out of our time
Right.
to finish a
happy
piece
to
of
address
work. And not
beyond us,
I totally respect your comment. I just think you need to talk to each other and find
Yes,
out.
I'd be happy to. Give me a call tomorrow or
For some reason,
email
I'm
me.
not very assured that.
Can I just, Mr. Schreiber, my colleague, really wants to make a comment, but I just want to say something. It's not about this article per se, but we've listened to a lot of people, and I have learned a lot about what's going on in the neighborhood, and I just want you to know, I really hear it, and I really get it, but I don't think this is the only venue or necessarily the best venue for some of this. There are other boards, including the Select Board, who is staffed by the town manager, who, and I'm not saying, forget us, go to the Select Board, but in a way I am, because I don't think this is just a zoning issue. And so if you keep coming here, you're not going to get satisfaction. You're going to be frustrated because the answers aren't here. We're really trying to prioritize this within the context of planning and zoning, and it's only a piece of the pie. Who orchestrates how the police coordinate with health or whatever, whether it's working or not working, that's not going to come out of this board. It just isn't. And so people are sort of upset with us, and I just think the venue for your educating people maybe needs to expand to some of the other governing boards. That's just...
I was just going to say that I feel very privileged because being on the planning board, I know what some of the management plans are, that for, duplexes and other projects that have been approved. And I find myself in the habit of, especially for houses in my neighborhood, that if I see the management plan not being followed, I will call the building commissioner, and they're incredibly responsive. But just hearing these comments, I realized that even what's on a management plan might not be clear, and it would not be clear specifically to the public to know what the management plan is for a house in your neighborhood. So I just wonder if there's some way of posting that. Like,
It's a public document, they're available. Just
is it
just
easily
request them.
available, or
If there is
Yeah.
question.
on the GIS, or?
It's not available in that sense, but you can ask for it, and we can get it to you.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be amazing if it were, because you can get deeds on GIS now.
The more recent ones, if you go to the GIS, when that means Geographic Information System, the town mapping, and you go to a specific property and you click, there's an icon that has the International Information symbol up above, just a letter I, and you click on that and you click on a property, a number of things will pop up, including the record of permits. And if you scroll down through the record of permits, the more recent ones, all of the permits, including all of the decisions, the management plans and plans and so forth, are available just by clicking on them. There are links
So
there.
it is there, if you know.
The older ones
Yeah.
are not, but the more recent ones are. So you can do that research yourself. If you have trouble finding it or you can't find it, call us, and we'll either direct you through the process, or you can come and we'll make copies for you. We're happy to do that.
I'd like to make a motion. I'm just in the interest of accomplishing, one of our pieces, and I was maybe doing another one tonight. I was hoping we'd get through a few, but that I would move that we recommend to the planning board the language as proposed for the two-family dwellings, as amended in tonight's meeting. I think we were clear where we were suggesting amendments, and that I would move that we go ahead and finish our work on the two-family dwellings tonight and move it along.
Second? Discussion? Thanks for the motion, but I'm going to vote against it, because on something big like this, I prefer to let it sit for a week and come back to it, look at it fresh. And so it may be that we don't do any more work on it, but I'm not inclined to say that it's settled personally. So obviously we'll vote on it, and if it passes, that's fine with me. But
I hear you.
is there any other discussion? Bruce?
I agree with you, I would wait a week.
So we go ahead with the vote?
It's going to be, could potentially be split or not. I would retract my motion, but I am a little concerned that we're going to rediscuss this next time.
Yeah.
We may not have to. I mean, just looking at it fresh, we may decide that we've done all that we can. But it's possible that the fresh language will suggest something to us, and we might want to go at it again.
I guess in favor of the motion that we're advisory to the larger group of
Right.
9 who will have, and I think it's close enough to put before them for that fresh eyes discussion.
Well, if you wish, this and anything else that you want can be what you present to them at your next meeting on the 5th, and ask them, not during the public hearings as a separate question, but as part of the discussion, saying these in particular we want your response on. And as we're
Should we
going
continue
forward.
working on it? Yeah, that's true.
So I guess I'd let my motion stand, and we could communicate whatever the results of that vote.
Okay. All in favor of the motion? I'll vote for it, so that's fine.
Oh, okay.
So that's a 4-0 vote. We're going to go forward. We're going to ask the planning board whether this is enough. They might send it back to us.
Okay.
So I would have liked to do lodging and boarding house, but let's go right to the public hearing schedule, so we can get a sense of what still has to be done and how much time we have.
There's a sheet here that talks about potential dates. That was based on earlier discussions. I think at this point, we might want to look at two-family dwelling for the 19th. And if we can get through lodging or boarding house this evening, we might do that as well, this evening and next Wednesday. I will repeat, and I'm going to come off like the Grinch on this, but part of the reason that you're struggling to get through past the first one is that you're entertaining public comment, and I don't want to shut the public comment off, but part of the purpose for organizing things in this way was so that you could take that at the planning board meeting. Good 40 minutes more has been spent engaging back and forth on public comment. And if you want to get something put together, and you've got a lot of work yet to do, even though town meeting is later this fall than it has ordinarily been, I really recommend, I guess for the last time, that you sort of limit public comment, just so that you can get the work done, and then the comment can occur at the planning board meetings.
That's a good point. I just know that there isn't going to be a planning board tonight, so it's.
Yeah, I understand.
I felt a little more flexible tonight.
Yeah.
But I think in general, I tend to agree with you.
I think it's a balancing act.
Yep.
So some of these things just take longer. In terms of the schedule, I won't be here on September 19th. I don't need to be here for all the public hearings, but if we could swap two-family dwelling and maybe move to the 19th as you suggested, and move functional family amendment to the 3rd, then that works for me, given that I won't be here for the 19th.
My sense is that it would be nice to talk about two-family dwellings and converted dwellings on the same night, and we haven't finished converted dwellings.
Point.
So,
Would you rather talk about that instead of lodging or boarding?
you mean try and finish that for the 19th?
Yeah.
And talk about it on the 5th, because I don't think
Yeah,
with
I
the
was gonna
remaining
say,
10 minutes that I can
I
stay
think
with
that's
you.
enough time.
Yeah, we could talk about it. We have that up front on the agenda on
We
the 5th.
might get through lodging and boarding in 10 minutes, though,
Yes, you might.
and then we'd have
Okay.
another one done.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Let me just quickly identify the changes that have been made. An issue has been raised, and I don't want it to confuse the discussion on this, but I want you to be aware of it. And there's a document in your packet that talks about this briefly. It's entitled Selected Interactions Between Amherst Zoning Bylaw and the Massachusetts Building Code. The building commissioner, in reviewing these, pointed out that lodging houses under one of the several definitions under state law have a trip threshold that it's 6 or more persons being lodged. I'm sorry, it's 4 or more being lodged. And attached to that is a requirement for sprinklering. So that if you have 4 or more persons not related to the second degree of kindred, which is an unspeakably archaic and foolish provision that the state seems to hold on to, in a specific residence, then it's considered to be a lodging house under one aspect of state law, and it must be sprinklered. Amherst's pattern right now is such that we allow up to 4 unrelated persons in a single dwelling unit. Up to 3, it doesn't have to be sprinklered. You hit that 4th person, and under the state building code, the building has to be sprinklered. So he just noted that there's this kind of hiccup in the way in which local zoning and the building code interact. There is no requirement anywhere that the two have to be absolutely in sync, but I wanted to make you aware of it. That's why this last phrase here was added, to make sure that somebody operating a lodging or boarding house was aware of that provision, that they had to, if they're talking 6 or more, then they have to sprinkler.
There's lots of things in the building code that apply that we don't reference in the zoning bylaw.
right.
And so I hear your point, and I think it's good to be aware of that, but I might suggest we don't have to take that particular MGL, Chapter 140, Section 22, and stick it here. Because there's so many other things that apply to
This is
category.
true.
So
That's
to me,
absolutely true.
it begins to set a precedent, or it begins to be some of that zoning clutter. Totally respect that there's a code enforcement issue, but and that doesn't go away.
I just wanted to bring it to your
I did.
attention.
In red, you did.
That aside, this is unchanged from the last time. You have a summary at the bottom. There is a summary of the very last page here of the common characteristics of definitions of zoning definitions of lodging houses in communities across Massachusetts and in other communities in other states, particularly those that have colleges in them. This is an attempt to put all of those pieces together. It's identifying this as a principal use. This is distinct from the accessory uses where somebody can have 1 to 3 people in their house by right or 4 to 6 by a special permit. This is a principal use of the property. Somebody owns this property and resides there, or somebody is renting this property and resides there and operates a lodging or boarding facility, and that is the principal use of the property. It's a commercial residential use, housed in a single dwelling or even in part of a larger dwelling. No fewer than 6, but not more than 10 unrelated persons. Some communities say 12. Our letter sublet lodging in private quarters for definite periods of time. No overnight stays by transient guests. It's not a bed and breakfast. It's not a hotel. Occupied by the owner or the manager of the use. Meals may or may not be provided, but there's only one common kitchen facility. We're not going to be walking around seeing whether or not people have hot plates or microwaves in their individual rooms, but you cannot have a kitchen in a lodging or boarding house, because if you do that, you're coming perilously close to it being a dwelling unit as opposed to a room that's being let. And then there is a long list of things that it's not. It's not the same as.
Let's not go there.
I'm not going to go through those.
So this does not change any regulation that we currently do. It just
It just adds a definition where we don't have one.
and I think this is relevant because a lot of the public comment that we've gotten in the last few months has referenced lodging or boarding house, but it actually has a specific meaning, and so it's useful to be clear about what that meaning is so that we're not talking about different things.
One of the things that this does not include, and it was by decision of the planning board, per earlier discussion, is amendments to the lodging or boarding use category itself. It has, since 1989, lodging or boarding houses, or actually much earlier, lodging or boarding houses as individual uses, principal uses, have not been permitted in the general residence district. That appears to have been reaction, an attempt to prevent the establishment of new ones. There have been lodging or boarding houses in the general residence district since the 1860s. So we may have to come back at some point to the, amendments to that section, but all this is doing is adding a definition where there is none.
I'd like to move that we go ahead and recommend this to the planning board, but I don't want to cut off discussion, but I'm ready to kick this one up the road.
Second? Any further discussion? All in favor of sending this to the planning board? Okay. So we have now sent lodging and boarding house, 2-family dwellings, rental registration, and surface water supply protection to the planning board. We still have single-family dwellings, converted dwellings, and functional family to work on.
Before we adjourn, when we're done, I just had a comment about our drafting before. I know we're getting ready to end, but I just,
Yeah, I don't have anything further.
yeah, we got through some of them tonight, and
Yeah.
I appreciated everybody's participation. I've been getting frustrated, this is my comment, I've been getting frustrated because I mark up a draft and we have a conversation, and then I get another draft from the planning department that has new stuff that we didn't say we wanted in there or we didn't talk about. And I would just suggest this far along in our review and as we get closer to town meeting, which we are, that we limit changes to the drafts we receive to either a tweak or a fix or something that we ask to be changed or looked into so that we stop moving the target so much. And I don't know, maybe I'm just being fussy, but we end up having to have discussion and pushback on new things that we didn't say we wanted to see in there. So there's a point in time where we can stop. We're looking at these and we'll push back or accept or comment. And it's been hard to manage all the changes.
I understand that, and that's not a new challenge that the planning boards and the department have faced. Part of what is happening is in parallel with this process is staff review. And so as we get comments from building commissioner, others who have responsibilities in the permitting process, we try to respond to those. And similarly, if we discover things we were not aware of before, we try to respond to those. And so what we have asked people to do is just keep your eye on the date. But if it would, I agree with Connie that from this point on, unless there are really significant issues that arise, we will try to absorb what you have said and have that be the thing and the only thing, unless there's something really unusual that occurs that gets reflected in the next set of drafts that both the subcommittee and the planning board see. There's a kind of a period of ferment about halfway through where things are still moving. Not a lot is moving at this point. I think that's a perfectly reasonable request.
Thanks. In specific, the converted dwellings, which we didn't even get to, there was a whole new thing there about if it's historic, it's this or that, and I'm like, where did this come from?
Yeah, I can tell you where that came
no,
from.
No.
That came from Steve.
Okay, so unless there's any further business, we're going to adjourn. Okay?
So there will be another subcommittee meeting next
Next week,
Wednesday
yes, right.
on September 5th.